Hello everyone, welcome to the Mr. Bean Family Story Channel. This is where every day we bring you interesting, fun, and inspiring stories from the Mr. Bean family. You'll meet me, Mr. Bean, someone you're probably already familiar with, and I hope you love my son with his surprising and meaningful stories, and my lovely daughter, who always brings positive energy with stories that are close to life. Each day, one of us will share new stories, exciting journeys, and today is my turn. I'll take you on a fun adventure, but also with deep life lessons. Today's story carries a simple yet important message. Never judge something by its appearance. Behind that appearance, there are always surprising things waiting for us. If you enjoy the lively atmosphere of our family, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any of our stories on this amazing journey. Share this video with your friends, family, and loved ones, and don't forget to leave your fun comments so I know what you think. Now let's dive into today's story and immerse ourselves in a world full of surprises. Let's go! Rebecca Miller sat by the kitchen window, the first light of dawn spilling across her minimalist apartment. The city below buzzed with the rhythm of Manhattan waking up, but up here, in her quiet space, everything felt still. A small cup of coffee sat beside her, steam curling up into the air, filling the room with a comforting warmth. At 42, Rebecca had built her empire from the ground up, starting with nothing more than an idea and an unshakable determination. Horizon Innovations, her tech company, was now one of the fastest-growing firms on the East Coast. She was dressed simply, as she always was, a white t-shirt, well-worn jeans, and sneakers. Nothing about her appearance screamed millionaire, yet her company had reached a level that few could even dream of. She had always preferred simplicity over designer brands, authenticity over appearance. It wasn't just a personal preference, it was a core belief she carried into every aspect of her business. "Are you sure about this approach, Rebecca?" Marcus, her assistant, asked through the speakerphone. His voice carried a trace of concern, a familiar tone when he worried about the risks Rebecca often took. "I have to see it for myself," Rebecca replied, her gaze drifting out to the skyline. "The paperwork for the acquisition is signed, but I need to understand their culture before I step in officially. The board expects the announcement tomorrow morning, but I can't lead from a distance." "Not this time." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Wakefield Dynamics is known for its polished image, you know. Their leadership is image conscious." "Exactly," Rebecca said, a slight smile touching her lips. "That's why I need to see what they're really made of. I built Horizon on authenticity and respect. If we're bringing Wakefield into our family, I need to know how they operate when no one's watching." Her mind wandered back to where it all began, 15 years ago, when she was living in a small apartment, hustling to build her first product. Now she was standing at the edge of a new chapter. But this new chapter wasn't just about business. It was about transforming the culture of Wakefield Dynamics, a company that had been around for decades. And to do that, she had to start with what no one else was willing to see. Rebecca slipped on her sneakers, grabbed her worn leather messenger bag, and checked the time. The subway would be the quickest way to get there. No need for a chauffeur-driven car today. "Being invisible is part of the strategy," she murmured to herself, walking out the door. "Of course you will," Marcus said with a sigh over the phone. "Just be careful, Rebecca. Not everyone appreciates authenticity the way you do." She ended the call, walking briskly down the stairwell of her apartment building. As she stepped into the street, her mind raced. Wakefield Dynamics had built its reputation on exclusivity, but Rebecca knew firsthand that no amount of prestige could hide a broken culture for long. As the new owner, she had the power to reshape that culture, but only if she understood it deeply. She couldn't rely solely on the sanitized reports or the polished interviews with executives. Today, she was going to see the truth behind the walls of Wakefield, and she wasn't going to sugarcoat what she found. The subway ride was uneventful, but as she got closer to Wakefield's towering headquarters, a nervous energy began to build in her chest. The sleek glass and steel building loomed ahead, its sheer size a symbol of the company's success. But success on the outside didn't always translate to happiness on the inside. As she approached the entrance, a group of Wakefield employees emerged, laughing among themselves. Rebecca stood to the side, watching them. Among the group was Christine Hartwell, the company's director of client relations, a woman who had always been described as driven and results-oriented in her profile. But Rebecca had already sensed something darker beneath her polished exterior. She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment that would define the start of her journey to change Wakefield's toxic culture. Rebecca stood still, watching as the group of Wakefield employees continued their conversation, their laughter echoing across the busy street. It was hard to miss Christine Hartwell at the center, her golden blonde hair perfectly styled, a sharply tailored beige pantsuit that screamed authority. The others flanked her like loyal followers. Two women in crisp white blazers, two men in black suits. The way they moved together, a tight-knit unit, made it clear that they were not just colleagues but part of an exclusive club, one that had no room for outsiders. Rebecca's gaze lingered on Christine. The company's profile had described her as driven, a high achiever, someone with a reputation for delivering results. But there was something about her smile, something predatory in the way she observed the world around her, as if she were constantly calculating how to use people to climb higher. The group's conversation drifted to the latest client acquisition, and Rebecca couldn't help but listen. It was clear from the tone in their voices that they were proud of the deals they'd closed, but there was no sense of real connection to the work. It was all about status, about keeping the right clients in the right circles, where appearances mattered more than substance. Suddenly, one of the men turned toward Rebecca, who had unknowingly been standing just within earshot. "Did you get lost on your way to the coffee shop?" he asked, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Staff entrances around the back." Rebecca straightened, forcing herself to stay calm, to not give them the satisfaction of rattling her. "I'm not staff," she replied evenly. "I had some business nearby." The man raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. Christine's eyes flicked over Rebecca's outfit, a simple white t-shirt, faded jeans and sneakers, and a subtle, almost imperceptible sneer crossed her face. "Business at Wakefield?" Christine's voice rang out, laced with disbelief. Rebecca met her gaze, maintaining her composure. "Yes, business at Wakefield." Christine raised an eyebrow, a thin smile curling on her lips, as she leaned toward one of the women beside her. "Maybe she's one of those startup people from the incubator," she whispered, her voice dripping with condescension. "You know, the ones who think hoodies and jeans are appropriate business attire?" The group laughed, sharp and dismissive, a laughter that felt more like an insult than amusement. Rebecca kept her face neutral, but the sting of their words wasn't lost on her. She had spent years building Horizon Innovations into something real, something that mattered. And yet here she was, being judged for wearing a simple outfit, as if her worth could be summed up in the clothes she wore. Christine's gaze flicked over her again, this time a bit more carefully. "Well," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "whatever business brings you here, you might want to consider an upgrade." She gestured dismissively toward Rebecca's clothes. "This is a professional district, sweetie. First impressions matter." "First impressions certainly do matter," Rebecca agreed quietly, her voice laced with something sharp, something that made Christine pause for just a second. But before the moment could settle, Christine recovered, putting on her practiced smile. "We have a lunch reservation at Alean," she said, the emphasis on important, unmistakable. "Some important clients to entertain. Best of luck with your business." As the group turned to leave, one of the men deliberately bumped into Rebecca's shoulder. "Sorry," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "Didn't see you there." "No problem," Rebecca replied, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. But the man wasn't finished. "God," he muttered loudly enough for others to hear. "Can you believe what they're letting into the financial district these days? Next thing you know, we'll have food trucks and street performers," Christine chuckled. "Well, that's what security is for, isn't it? To keep out the undesirables." As they walked away, Rebecca stood still, taking in the entire interaction. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about something much deeper. This was how Wakefield's leadership treated people who didn't fit their mold, people they considered beneath them. She felt a spark of determination. This culture needed to change. She discreetly pulled out her phone and snapped a few pictures of the group as they walked off, then texted Marcus. "Conducted first cultural assessment. Very illuminating. We have work to do." Rebecca stood for a moment longer, watching them disappear into the sleek glass building. Tomorrow those gleaming windows would belong to her, and she was ready to begin. The next morning, Rebecca stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, adjusting the lapels of her freshly tailored white suit. The transformation from her simple jeans and t-shirt to something so impeccably polished felt symbolic, as if she were shedding one layer of herself and stepping into a new world. Today wasn't just any day. It was the day she would officially step into Wakefield Dynamics as its new owner. But more importantly, it was the day she would begin the real work of changing the culture that lay beneath its shiny exterior. Her phone buzzed and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from Marcus. "The board meeting is at 9. Are you ready?" Rebecca smiled faintly and tapped out a quick reply. "Ready as I'll ever be." She took one last look at her reflection, her eyes steady. This was a challenge unlike any she had faced before. She had built Horizon from the ground up, but that had been about innovation, not transformation. Changing a company's culture was different. It wasn't just about processes or products, it was about people. And people, as she had learned over the years, could be messy, complicated, and unpredictable. As she walked out the door and into the cab waiting downstairs, her mind raced. Last night, as she had sat on her balcony, she had reflected on what she had witnessed outside the Wakefield building. Christine and her team had displayed everything she had hoped wasn't true about the company: exclusion, arrogance, and a sense of superiority. They had treated her like a nobody, but in reality, they were the ones who were blind to the bigger picture. The car hummed quietly as it made its way toward Wakefield's headquarters, the tall buildings of Manhattan stretching out before her. Rebecca could almost feel the weight of the company's legacy, a legacy that had built itself on appearances and polished reputations. But underneath it all, something had been rotting. Today, she was about to unmask that rot. As the car pulled up to the towering glass building of Wakefield Dynamics, Rebecca felt a small knot of anticipation tighten in her chest. She stepped out, the familiar rush of energy that only Manhattan could offer sweeping over her. The building stood in sharp contrast to the city's chaotic pulse, a fortress of glass and steel that symbolized the power and prestige that Wakefield had so carefully cultivated. Rebecca entered the building with the kind of quiet confidence that she had spent years perfecting. As she passed the sleek marble lobby, the receptionist greeted her with a polite but neutral smile, the kind of smile that said, "We've seen your type before." She didn't let it faze her. There was no time to get distracted by meaningless pleasantries. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like a slow ascent into a new era. She reviewed the key points in her mind. Today, she would introduce herself to the leadership team, formally take her place as the new owner, and, if necessary, begin the process of confronting the culture that was so deeply embedded within the company. But there was one thing she needed to see first: how Wakefield's top executives would react to her presence. As the elevator doors opened, Rebecca was greeted by the same polished, expensive environment she had seen the day before. But today it was different. Today she wasn't just another outsider. Today she was the new owner. She walked into the large conference room where the executives were already gathered, their eyes briefly flicking to her as they whispered among themselves. At the far end of the table, Christine Hartwell sat, her posture straight, her sharp gaze assessing Rebecca. She had no idea what was coming, but Rebecca did. The moment had arrived. It was time to make her presence known. Rebecca entered the conference room with a quiet, unassuming confidence, her eyes sweeping over the long, polished table and the group of Wakefield executives seated at it. They were all here, just as she had expected, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The morning's meeting had been set up as a formality, the announcement that she was officially the new owner of Wakefield Dynamics. But Rebecca had a deeper purpose in mind. This wasn't just about ownership. This was about setting a tone. She stood for a moment by the door, her gaze locking onto Christine Hartwell, who was seated at the head of the table. The tension in the room was palpable, the executives quietly assessing Rebecca as she made her way to the front. Christine, in her perfectly tailored beige suit, offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Rebecca returned it, her own smile calm and measured, though the weight of what she was about to reveal hung in the air. "Thank you all for being here," Rebecca began, her voice steady, clear. I know there's been a lot of speculation about who the new owner of Wakefield Dynamics is, and now you know it's me, Rebecca Miller, founder and CEO of Horizon Innovations. A murmur ran through the room, and for a brief moment, Rebecca caught a flicker of surprise in their eyes. It was exactly what she had hoped for, but there was still more to do. She had no intention of letting them off the hook so easily. We're here today because I believe in Wakefield's potential, Rebecca continued, her tone calm yet firm. But I also believe that potential has been stifled by the culture here. A culture that, quite frankly, needs to change. And that starts with leadership. She paused, letting her words sink in. She could feel the weight of the room's gaze on her, but she didn't flinch. This was the moment she had been preparing for. Rebecca took a slow breath, steadying herself before continuing. She could already sense the unease building in the room, and she knew she had to maintain control. The silence that followed her words was thick, charged with tension. Christine, who had been confident just moments ago, now looked slightly uncomfortable, her usual poise starting to crack. I've spent a lot of time studying Wakefield, Rebecca said, her gaze sweeping the room, making sure each executive felt the weight of her words. And while I respect your work, I can't ignore the fact that the environment here is toxic. I've witnessed it firsthand. A few eyes darted uncomfortably, but Rebecca pushed forward. She wasn't going to sugarcoat it any longer. This company's leadership has fostered an atmosphere where exclusivity and appearance matter more than results and respect. She continued, her voice gaining strength. This is not the kind of company I'm going to lead, and it's certainly not the company I want Wakefield to be known as under my ownership. Christine's jaw tightened, and Rebecca saw her start to open her mouth, likely to defend herself, but she didn't let her. I've already had my first cultural assessment, Rebecca said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room like a blade. And I have a video I'd like to show you all. A very revealing one. The large screen behind her flickered to life, and the footage from the plaza the previous day appeared on the screen. Rebecca watched the room's reaction carefully. Some faces stiffened, others turned pale, but none of them spoke. The footage was damning. Christine and her group, mocking a stranger, laughing at someone they saw as inferior. And right there on the screen was the moment they had all crossed a line. Rebecca didn't need to say anything more. The room spoke for itself. Rebecca stood at the front of the conference room, watching the shocked faces of Wakefield's leadership team as the video continued to play. The murmurs that had started as whispers now filled the room with uncomfortable energy. Christine's face was ashen, her eyes flicking between Rebecca and the screen, but she said nothing. For a moment, Rebecca allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of the situation sink in. Does anyone have anything to say? Rebecca's voice was cool, controlled, but it held an undeniable edge. The room remained still. No one spoke. It was clear that the reality of what had just been revealed, of their behavior, their arrogance, had hit hard. It wasn't just about the footage. It was the truth of how they had operated for so long under the guise of professionalism. Rebecca took a slow step forward, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. This is the kind of culture I'm inheriting? She asked, her eyes never leaving Christine. A culture where people are treated like this because they don't fit into your narrow vision of success? Still, no one responded. Christine, who had spent the last several minutes frozen, now looked like she was preparing to defend herself. But Rebecca wasn't giving her that chance. You've built an empire based on appearances and exclusivity, Rebecca continued, her voice unwavering. But what good is an empire if it's built on sand? How many talented people have you pushed out because they didn't look the part or weren't part of your little clique? She paused for a beat, letting her words sink in. Wakefield Dynamics has incredible potential. I see it. But that potential is buried beneath all this. Rebecca gestured toward the group. This behavior. And I'm here to fix it. Christine finally stirred, her voice tight with frustration. You can't just walk in here and… Rebecca raised her hand, cutting her off. You don't get to finish that sentence. Not after what I just saw. If you're going to be part of this company moving forward, then you need to take responsibility for your actions. And that starts now. Christine opened her mouth to protest again, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. The fight in her had drained, replaced by a sense of inevitable defeat. Rebecca could see it in her eyes. Christine knew her time here was running out. The rest of the executives, all of whom had sat quietly watching the exchange, seemed unsure how to react, caught between wanting to defend their leader and the undeniable truth Rebecca had just laid bare. Rebecca stepped back from the screen, turning to address the rest of the room. "I didn't come here to make enemies," she said, her tone softening, though her resolve remained firm. "I came here because I see something in Wakefield that you all might have forgotten. This company is talented, creative, and full of potential. But as long as this culture of exclusion continues, you'll be fighting to stay relevant in an industry that's moving forward. The world is changing, and you all need to change with it." A few executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some casting furtive glances at each other. Rebecca's eyes locked onto one of the men who had been standing with Christine the day before. Jeffrey, she recalled. He didn't meet her gaze, his posture stiff, his fingers fidgeting with the pen in his hand. She didn't need to say anything else to him. His guilt was clear. Rebecca turned back to Christine, her expression unreadable. "You've had your chance, but you've failed to lead this company in a way that aligns with the values we claim to uphold. And now, you need to go." The words hung heavy in the air. A collective gasp rippled through the room. But it wasn't just the shock of her announcement that silenced everyone. It was the finality in her voice. Rebecca wasn't backing down. Christine's mouth opened and closed as if searching for a way to save herself, but there was nothing left to say. Finally, she slumped in her chair, defeated, her shoulders heavy with the weight of the reality Rebecca had just imposed. She knew, as did everyone else in the room, that this was the beginning of a new era at Wakefield, one that would not tolerate the toxic behaviors of the past. Rebecca nodded once, as if acknowledging the conclusion of a long overdue chapter. "Get your things," she added, "and don't bother returning." The decision had been made, and now it was time for change. Rebecca stood by her office window, watching the city below. The skyline of Manhattan stretched out before her, a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside her. The meeting with Wakefield's leadership team had left her drained, but it had also solidified her resolve. She had made her first big move, and while Christine's departure was necessary, it was just the beginning. The harder part was yet to come. Marcus had called her earlier, running through the details of the severance packages for the other executives. But Rebecca knew that the real challenge wasn't just about firing those who had failed the company. It was about rebuilding the entire culture. And that would take more than just a few high-profile exits. It would take trust, transparency, and, most importantly, a shift in how people viewed success. Her mind kept drifting back to the conversation she'd had with the employees who had been sidelined under Christine's leadership. The cleaning staff who had been treated like invisible workers. The designers who had been forced to cater to a brand vision that didn't align with their creativity. It was clear to Rebecca now, Wakefield was a place where talent had been wasted for the sake of maintaining an image. Rebecca's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Marcus entered holding a tablet in his hand. "We've got some immediate tasks to address," he said, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "But first, there's something I think you need to see." He handed her the tablet. On the screen was a list of names, promising young talent who had left Wakefield in the last year. Most had cited a toxic work environment, with several mentioning Christine specifically. Rebecca let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the responsibility that now rested on her shoulders. These were the people she needed to bring back, to rebuild the company from the ground up. But how? She glanced at Marcus. "We need a plan, a real one." "Working on it," he replied, his tone serious. "But I'm afraid the rebuilding process won't be as easy as we hope." Rebecca nodded, her fingers tapping lightly against the tablet. The names on the list were a stark reminder of the uphill battle ahead. Bringing back the talent that had left Wakefield was one thing. Re-establishing trust and a sense of belonging was another. "I know it won't be easy," she said, her voice firm, "but if we're going to transform this company, we can't just fix the surface. We need to get to the heart of the issues, starting with how we treat people." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're not planning to go after the same group of people who watched Christine's exit with no reaction?" Rebecca's gaze sharpened. She had been watching the executives closely during the meeting, and she knew Marcus was right. The lack of empathy in the room had been telling. While some of them were undoubtedly concerned about their own futures, none seemed truly shaken by Christine's departure. That was the problem. They were too far removed from the reality of how their actions had affected those around them. It's not about going after them, Rebecca replied. It's about holding them accountable. We can't just sweep this under the rug. If they want to stay, they need to understand that things are going to change. There's no place for behavior like that in Wakefield anymore. Marcus sighed, glancing at the tablet again. And what about the others? The ones who are still here but have been quiet. The ones who've been biding their time, waiting to see which way the wind blows? Rebecca paused, thinking for a moment. She had seen the hesitation in some of the employees' eyes, the uncertainty about whether this change would be real or just another phase. But that was why she was doing this, to prove that it wasn't just talk. We start by showing them that change is possible, she said, but it has to come from the top. We set the tone, and we make sure that those who don't align with our values know they won't be welcome here. Marcus seemed to consider her words carefully before nodding. All right, I'll make the calls. We've got a long road ahead, but at least now I know you're in it for the right reasons. Rebecca looked out at the city again, the towering buildings around her serving as a reminder of the weight of her decisions. This wasn't just about corporate restructuring. It was about creating a new environment where talent could thrive, where people weren't held back by the culture of exclusion and toxicity that had previously defined Wakefield. The work was just beginning, and Rebecca knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. But she was ready. The morning sun filtered through the glass walls of the conference room, casting a warm, golden glow across the polished wood of the long table. The employees of Wakefield Dynamics had gathered, but today the room was charged with a different kind of energy. There was a palpable tension in the air, no longer just curiosity or nervousness about Rebecca's arrival, but something much deeper. It was the weight of uncertainty. Rebecca stood at the front, her posture straight, her voice steady as she addressed the room. She had already made it clear to the executives what was expected, but now it was time to talk to everyone. The true test of leadership was in how she handled this moment, not just the decision to clean house, but how to move forward with integrity. I know there's a lot of questions about what's happening here, she began, looking around the room. She made sure to make eye contact with as many people as possible. But before we go any further, I need you to understand one thing. The culture at Wakefield is changing. This company is moving in a new direction, one that values transparency, respect, and collaboration. Rebecca paused, letting her words settle. She could see the mixture of uncertainty and hope in their eyes. Many of them had spent years working under an unspoken hierarchy where the power dynamics were set and everything felt stagnant. But now the power had shifted, and the question was whether they were ready to change with it. I know some of you are skeptical, she continued, but this is your chance to help shape what comes next. I can't do this alone, and frankly, I don't want to. I need everyone here, each and every one of you, to be a part of this transformation. A few people exchanged looks, hesitant but intrigued. Rebecca could feel the atmosphere shift slightly, just enough to make her confident that she was breaking through the walls that had been built up over the years. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was the right step. You've heard the rumors, she said, shifting the tone of her voice. You know that there have been people who've left because of how things were run. But what you don't know is the most important thing. Change is not just necessary, it's inevitable. The room fell silent. Rebecca's eyes scanned the faces in front of her, knowing that the real work was just beginning. Rebecca took a slow breath, letting the silence settle before she spoke again. But I'm not here to dwell on the past, she said, her voice gaining strength. I'm here to build something better, something that we can all be proud of. Wakefield has incredible talent. It's been overlooked for too long, but that ends now. She could see the skepticism in some of the faces in the room, the lingering doubt about whether this was really going to be different. But Rebecca wasn't about to back down. She had already made her decisions, and she was determined to follow through. I want you to know that I'm committed to making Wakefield a place where all of you feel like you belong, where you're valued for what you bring to the table, Not just how you fit into some arbitrary mold, she continued. Starting today, we're going to change how we operate. We'll focus on inclusivity, not just in terms of diversity, but in how we collaborate, how we communicate, and how we lift each other up. Rebecca could feel the shift in the room, the energy changing. Some faces were still unsure, but there were others who were leaning forward, clearly invested in what she was saying. She wasn't expecting immediate buy-in from everyone, but the fact that she was getting their attention was a victory in itself. She paused, looking around one more time. This is your chance to show me who you are, who we can be together. We're going to implement new structures, new processes, and yes, new leadership. I want to hear your ideas. I want to hear your concerns. A quiet murmur passed through the group. For the first time, it seemed like they were listening, not just to her, but to each other. Rebecca wasn't just trying to fix what was broken. She was trying to build a foundation that would allow everyone to thrive. As for those who can't get on board, well, she let the words hang in the air. Change is difficult, but it's the only way forward. And if you're not ready for that, then perhaps this is no longer the place for you. The finality in her voice cut through the tension. She had made her position clear. The room held its collective breath, waiting for someone to speak, but no one did. Rebecca had taken the first step. The rest would follow, or they wouldn't. With the meeting wrapping up, Rebecca allowed herself one last look around the room. She could see a few faces still hesitant, but there were also those who were ready to move forward. That was all she needed. The first wave of trust. From here on, it was about action, and she was more than ready to lead them there. The days following the meeting had been a whirlwind. Rebecca had expected resistance, but what surprised her most was how quickly things began to shift. Wakefield's employees, many of whom had felt overlooked or ignored for years, started coming forward with ideas, concerns, and, most importantly, hope. It was as if they were finally allowed to believe in the company again, to believe in the possibility of something better. Rebecca sat in her new office, reviewing the feedback that had poured in over the past few days. Some ideas were ambitious, others more modest, but they all shared one thing in common: a desire to rebuild what had been broken. She knew it wouldn't happen overnight, but seeing the enthusiasm made her feel like they were on the right track. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was Marcus. Rebecca, I think we need to have a serious conversation about the next steps. His voice was tight with urgency. We've got some pushback from a few key players. Some of the senior staff, those who've been here the longest, are starting to question the direction we're taking. Rebecca exhaled slowly. She had anticipated this. Change was never easy, especially when it meant disrupting the power structure that had been in place for so long. But she wasn't going to back down now. I expected this, she replied, her tone calm. But we can't let fear dictate our future. It's time to be clear with them. Let's bring everyone together for a meeting tomorrow. It's time to lay it all on the table. Marcus hesitated for a moment. You think they're ready for that? Rebecca glanced at the view outside her office, the city sprawling beneath her. They'll have to be. We're not going back. Not now, not ever. The decision was made. Tomorrow they would face the storm head-on. It was time to show the old guard that the future had arrived. The following morning, Rebecca stood at the front of the same conference room where she had made her first bold move weeks ago. This time, the stakes were higher. It wasn't just about confronting the leaders who had clung to outdated traditions. It was about laying the groundwork for the future of Wakefield. The room filled with murmurs as the senior staff arrived, some of them walking in with guarded expressions, others trying to mask their discomfort with forced smiles. Rebecca could see it in their eyes. They were unsure. They had been part of the old system for so long that the thought of real change was like a distant, almost unreal possibility. Good morning, everyone, Rebecca began, her voice steady as it cut through the hushed conversations. I appreciate you all being here today. We've made a lot of progress since the last time we spoke, but today is different. Today I want to address the concerns that have been raised and get everyone on the same page. She could feel the weight of their gazes on her, the pressure mounting as they waited for her to lead the discussion. Marcus stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, his presence a silent but powerful reminder that Rebecca wasn't alone in this fight. She continued, her words deliberate. We're no longer working in a vacuum. We've already taken the first steps to reshape the culture here at Wakefield, but it's time to go further. I want you to understand something very clearly. This company will thrive because of its people, not despite them. And that means treating each and every one of you with the respect you deserve. Some of the senior staff exchanged uneasy glances, but Rebecca wasn't backing down. We have to acknowledge the past and the way it's held this company back, but we can't keep letting it define us. From this point on, we are a company built on inclusion, innovation, and results. And if anyone in this room isn't on board with that, now is the time to speak up. The room fell silent as Rebecca's words hung in the air. This was the moment of truth, the defining moment for Wakefield's future. She wasn't going to settle for anything less than a complete transformation. If they couldn't see that, then they didn't belong in this new Wakefield. The days that followed the meeting had been a blur of activity. Rebecca had expected resistance, but the level of urgency and the sense of transformation in the air was stronger than she had anticipated. Employees began approaching her, cautiously at first, sharing their thoughts and suggestions, revealing a sense of relief as though they had been waiting for this moment. It was a slow but steady shift, and Rebecca couldn't help but feel a growing sense of optimism. She was finally seeing the cracks in the old facade, the first signs that the walls that had held Wakefield's culture together were beginning to crumble. But while Rebecca was encouraged by the positive feedback, she knew it wasn't enough. There was still much work to be done, and the hardest part was ahead of her. The old guard, those senior leaders who had thrived in the toxic culture, were still there. Many had begun to toe the line, but their reluctance to fully embrace the changes was evident in their every interaction. Rebecca had seen it in their eyes during the last meeting, the hesitation, the reluctance to let go of the power they had once held so tightly. It was time for the next step. Rebecca stood in front of her desk, reviewing the new organizational structure she had proposed. The changes were sweeping: new leadership teams, cross-departmental collaboration, mentorship programs. But the biggest change was still in the works: getting rid of the leaders who couldn't or wouldn't adapt to the new culture. She knew the next phase of this transformation wasn't just about shifting policies. It was about replacing old habits with new ways of thinking, working, and living within Wakefield. The pressure was mounting, and Rebecca felt it more than ever. This was her moment to prove not just to the company, but to herself, that she could build something real, something that would last. The following morning, Rebecca called for a meeting with the senior leadership team. She knew it was time to take decisive action. There was no room for half measures anymore. She had spent weeks observing, listening, and understanding the depth of the issues plaguing the company. Now it was time to confront those who had been resistant to change and show them that this was no longer the environment they could control. As the senior team assembled around the conference table, Rebecca stood before them, her posture commanding yet composed. The usual tension was in the air, but today it felt different. There was an undercurrent of nervousness, an awareness that they were about to be held accountable in ways they hadn't been before. "I appreciate you all being here," she began, her voice clear but firm. "We've made strides toward transforming Wakefield, but we're at a critical juncture. There are still people in this room who represent the very culture we've been trying to change." Rebecca let her words hang in the air for a moment, letting the silence speak volumes. Some of the executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes avoiding hers. She could tell that they knew exactly where this was going. "I've watched closely," Rebecca continued, "and I've listened to the feedback from across the company. It's become clear that we need to make some difficult decisions about who stays and who goes. We need leaders who are aligned with the values of respect, transparency, and collaboration. And if you're not willing to embrace those values, then we're going to have to part ways." The room was still, the weight of her words sinking in. She saw a few faces turn pale, but Rebecca wasn't done. This was just the beginning of the tough conversations that needed to happen. "We're building something better here, and we can't afford to carry the baggage of outdated practices any longer," she said, her voice unwavering. "We're moving forward, and if you're not on board, now is the time to step aside." This was the moment of reckoning, and Rebecca knew that only by making these hard choices could she ensure that Wakefield would truly become the company she had envisioned, a place where everyone could thrive, free from the toxic grip of the past. The aftermath of Rebecca's meeting with the senior leadership team had left the company in a state of quiet anticipation. It had been clear that some of the senior leaders were not willing to adapt, and those who had resisted change had already begun packing their things. Rebecca watched with a mixture of resolve and frustration as the people who had once held the reins of Wakefield walked out the door. But despite the departures, Rebecca knew that this wasn't a loss. It was a necessary purge. The real work was about to begin. In the days following the meeting, Rebecca focused on building the new structure that would support her vision for Wakefield. She had already started reaching out to potential leaders who embodied the core values she wanted to instill: respect, collaboration, and innovation. The search wasn't easy. There were people who fit the criteria but had been overlooked or held back by the old culture. Now it was her job to create an environment where they could thrive. One of the first decisions she made was bringing Emily Chen, the talented designer who had been overlooked in the past, into the leadership fold. Emily had quietly stood out for years, but under the old guard, her ideas had been disregarded. Rebecca saw her potential, and she wasn't about to let another piece of talent slip through the cracks. "Emily," Rebecca said as she met with her in her new office, "I want you to lead our new digital innovation team. Your creativity and ideas have been exactly what Wakefield has needed for a long time." Emily blinked, clearly surprised. "Me? But I've never—" Rebecca smiled. "You've been ready for years. You just needed someone to see it. And now I'm giving you the opportunity to prove it." Emily's face lit up, a spark of excitement igniting in her eyes. It was exactly what Rebecca had hoped for. Someone who was finally being recognized for their worth, not for the suit they wore or the name they carried. Rebecca's heart swelled with a quiet satisfaction. This was what leadership was about: lifting others up, not just leading from the front, but empowering those who had been silenced for far too long. This was only the beginning. But as she looked out over the city skyline, Rebecca knew that change would never be easy. It would take time, patience, and grit. Still, she was certain they were heading in the right direction, and Wakefield was going to be better for it. As Emily sat across from her, still processing Rebecca's offer, a quiet understanding passed between them. Rebecca could see the uncertainty in Emily's eyes, but also a flicker of hope. It was the kind of spark Rebecca had been searching for, the drive and potential that had long been ignored. She had made the decision to trust in people like Emily, people who were ready to contribute, to lead, and to shape Wakefield's future. "I won't let you down," Emily finally said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've always wanted to make a difference here, but I didn't know if I was ever going to get the chance." Rebecca nodded. "You'll have the chance. You've earned it." As Emily left, Rebecca took a moment to reflect on what was happening in the company. The restructuring was more than just about replacing leaders or making strategic hires. It was about creating a culture where people were given opportunities to rise, not based on who they knew or how they fit into a mold, but because of their true talents and potential. That was the foundation she was laying, one brick at a time. Later that afternoon, Rebecca gathered her new leadership team for their first meeting together. It wasn't just about the decisions they would make, but about the way they would work together to build something sustainable. This was their chance to set the tone for the future, to lead by example. "We're here because we all believe in the same thing," Rebecca began as she addressed the group. "We believe in a Wakefield that values its people, that values innovation and transparency. This isn't just about business. It's about creating a space where we can all thrive, regardless of our background or where we started." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I'm not asking for loyalty to me, but loyalty to the values we stand for. If we do this right, we'll create something extraordinary." There was a moment of silence followed by nods of agreement around the table. Rebecca felt a sense of pride, but she knew the work had only just begun. They had made the first step toward a new beginning, but there were still many challenges ahead. As the meeting concluded, Rebecca stepped away with a sense of resolve. This was the start of something real, something lasting, and she was ready for whatever came next. The energy in Wakefield's offices had shifted dramatically in the weeks following Rebecca's meeting with the senior leadership team. The changes were no longer just theoretical or talked about in hushed tones. They were real, tangible, and visible. Employees who had once stayed quiet, uncertain of their place in the company, now spoke up. They shared ideas, voiced concerns, and began to take ownership of the new direction. Rebecca watched it all unfold from her corner office. The building had a new pulse to it, and for the first time in years, it felt like a place where people could thrive. Not just a corporate machine that churned out results at any cost. The sense of community, of respect for one another's talents, had begun to replace the old toxic hierarchy. There was still a long way to go, but the first steps had been taken. She was in her office when Marcus knocked and entered, a look of determination on his face. "We need to talk," he said, his tone serious. Rebecca set down the report she had been reading and gestured for him to take a seat. "What's going on?" Marcus hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There's been some resistance from the board. They're questioning whether this new approach is really going to work in the long term. They're worried about the potential fallout, the clients we could lose, or even how this new culture might affect the bottom line." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, taking a moment to process what Marcus had said. She knew the board had always been a bit more conservative, but this was expected. It wasn't easy to dismantle decades of tradition and change the way a company operated at its core. "I'm not worried about the board's concerns," Rebecca said calmly. "This is the right direction, and I'm confident that the changes we've made will make Wakefield stronger, not weaker. If we stay true to our values, the results will speak for themselves." Marcus nodded, but his brow furrowed slightly. "I agree with you, but the board isn't always as patient as we need them to be. They want fast results, and we know this is going to take time." Rebecca knew he was right. It was one thing to bring about change in a company, but it was another thing entirely to convince those at the top that the change was sustainable. It wasn't going to be quick or easy, but it was necessary. "We have to prove it to them," Rebecca said. "We'll show them the results. We'll focus on what matters, the people, the culture, and the work we're producing. That will speak louder than anything." Marcus gave her a thoughtful look. "I'll start working on getting those metrics together." Rebecca smiled, grateful for his unwavering support. "Thanks, Marcus. Let's get this done." This was the challenge she had signed up for, a fight not just for the future of Wakefield, but for the kind of company it could become. And no matter the pressure from the board, Rebecca was ready to face it head-on. The next day, Rebecca gathered her leadership team for their first all-hands meeting since the restructuring had begun. She knew this was a crucial moment, not just to assess how far they had come, but to reinforce the commitment to the changes they had started. The energy in the room was different now. There was a sense of urgency, yes, but also a shared vision for what Wakefield could become. People were no longer just going through the motions. They were engaged. Rebecca stood at the front, looking over the team. "Today marks a new chapter for Wakefield," she began, her voice steady but filled with purpose. "We've made progress, but we are just getting started. The changes we've made are about more than just restructuring. They are about creating a company culture where people are valued for what they contribute, not for how they fit into an old mold." She paused, allowing her words to resonate. "I'm proud of how far we've come, but I'm even more excited about what's ahead. We've already begun to rebuild, but now we need to continue pushing the boundaries of what's possible." Emily Chen, who had now taken the reins of the digital innovation team, spoke up, her voice clear and confident. "Rebecca, the creative team is ready to dive in. We've already begun brainstorming new ideas for our clients, and the response has been overwhelmingly positive. This feels like the beginning of something truly revolutionary." Rebecca smiled. "I knew I made the right choice bringing you on board, Emily. Your leadership has already shown the kind of creativity and vision that Wakefield needs." The meeting continued, with department heads discussing their progress and challenges. As Rebecca listened to them talk, she felt a sense of pride. The foundation they were laying was strong, but she also knew that there would be more obstacles ahead, especially with the board still uneasy about the pace of change. But for now, Rebecca felt confident. The transformation wasn't just happening from the top down, it was happening from within. Employees were becoming more vocal, more engaged, and more invested in the company's success. It was clear to her that they were building something lasting. The hard part wasn't over yet, but they were headed in the right direction. As the meeting concluded, Rebecca made her way to her office, her mind already racing toward the next step. There was still so much work to be done, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like Wakefield had a real chance to become something great. And this time, it would be on her terms, not the outdated, toxic ones that had once defined it. The fight was far from over, but Rebecca was more determined than ever to see it through. Rebecca stood in front of the expansive windows in her office. The sprawling city of Manhattan laid out beneath her like a map of endless possibility. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm glow over the skyscrapers that seemed to pulse with the energy of the city. She'd spent the day in back-to-back meetings, most of them focused on new initiatives and the progress they had made since the company's transformation had started. But today, everything felt different. The board had finally agreed to the metrics she had presented, the data that showed how Wakefield was evolving, how the culture was improving, and how the bottom line had started to reflect the changes. The naysayers in the room had been quieted, and for the first time since she had taken over the company, Rebecca felt like she was on the verge of something real, something lasting. But she wasn't done yet. She knew that even though things were improving, it was time for the final step, something that would cement Wakefield's future and ensure that the culture they were building wouldn't be forgotten once the dust settled. As she turned away from the window, her phone buzzed on her desk. It was a message from Marcus. The final presentation for the clients is tomorrow. Everything is set. Rebecca smiled, a sense of satisfaction washing over her. This was the moment. Tomorrow she would show the world what Wakefield had become, not just a company that talked about change, but one that had truly transformed. She sat down at her desk, reviewing the final details of the presentation. It wasn't just about the numbers anymore, or the clients they had secured. It was about the heart of the company. The values that had driven this transformation were going to be at the core of the presentation. And for the first time in a long time, Rebecca felt a sense of peace. The hard work was finally paying off, and Wakefield was ready for its new beginning. As she clicked through the slides one last time, Rebecca reflected on everything they had accomplished, the obstacles they had overcome, the culture they had rebuilt, and the people they had empowered. Tomorrow wasn't just about securing a few more deals. It was about showing the world that Wakefield Dynamics had finally become what it was meant to be. A company that valued people over profit, creativity over conformity, and collaboration over competition. The next morning, Rebecca stood at the front of the sleek, modern conference room, the final presentation slides ready on the screen behind her. The room was filled with key clients, industry leaders, and stakeholders, people who had once viewed Wakefield as an old-fashioned company, bogged down by a toxic culture. Today, Rebecca was going to change that perception. Today, Wakefield would show them its true potential. She glanced around the room, noting the mix of anticipation and skepticism on the faces of the attendees. Many had heard about the changes happening within the company, but this was the moment when she would prove that it was more than just talk. This was about showing that the new Wakefield was here to stay. Taking a deep breath, Rebecca stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. When I took over Wakefield Dynamics, it wasn't just about acquiring a company. It was about creating something better, a company built on values that matter: respect, innovation, and collaboration. She paused for a moment, making eye contact with several of the clients in the room, who were now leaning in with interest. This wasn't just a pitch. This was her vision for the future. Over the past few months, we've focused on transforming our internal culture, replacing outdated practices with a commitment to inclusivity, transparency, and people-first leadership, Rebecca continued. And it's already paying off. We've seen improvements not just in productivity, but in creativity, morale, and trust. Rebecca clicked to the next slide, showcasing the numbers: the increase in employee engagement, the reduced turnover, the rise in client satisfaction. She could see the shift in the room as people started to see the results they had been waiting for. But the most important change, Rebecca said, her voice gaining strength, is the way we approach our work. We no longer see our employees as just cogs in a machine. We see them as innovators, leaders, and creators. The culture at Wakefield is now one where every voice is heard, and every idea has the potential to change the world. The room was silent for a moment. Rebecca could feel the weight of her words sinking in. She knew that this was it, the culmination of everything she had worked for. The message was clear. Wakefield had transformed, and it wasn't just because of the changes in leadership or structure. It was because they had fundamentally shifted how they saw themselves and their purpose. Rebecca smiled, the weight of the last few months lifting from her shoulders. She had done it. They had done it. And the future of Wakefield Dynamics was brighter than ever.